All right, let's continue. So now we're going to actually talk about the transition Dwapara Yuga here, and so the 200 year of transition prepares for the principles of Dwapara Yuga. So these are the Vedic principles that we talked about earlier, applied to this Yuga. One, the science portion is the steam power was invented the same year as the start of Bronze Age transition, 1698. That's kind of right on, like that steam power would be used then. And so now comes, when you think about what we had in the Dark Age and all that, now we have quantum electrodynamics, relativity, nanotechnology, genetic engineering. And the one that really blows my mind too is synthetic biology, how they actually were able to make a synthetic DNA that would start up a cell, and when they put it they changed the cell into a different type of cell, and when they tried to start it up, it wasn't working, and they found out by going through millions and millions of lines of code, they found that they had one letter incorrect, and once they fixed it, the cell started up, and it's just, things that we're doing are pretty mind-boggling. And so outer exploration is the other part of it, and transition. You have the New World, circumnavigation of the globe, but now comes much more like exploration of biology, the atom, outer space, landing on the moon, Mars, and probes to the different moons of Saturn and Jupiter and all that. And now we have this passion and energy mixed with the darkness and the inertia of the Dark Age. So it's like taking mud and stirring it up, so you think things are getting better. Well, they are, but the kind of, when you think of the Industrial Revolution, horrible, the way people were treated and the children working, in the labor, and a lot of bad stuff was happening, and especially the 100-year ascending Dark Age with all the terrible violence. And but then I just want to mention The Prince by Machiavelli. He describes a new type of ruler of the Renaissance, a perfect mix of passion and darkness. He's well educated according to humanist principles, but he's also ambitious, hard-headed, and ruthless. So that gives you kind of an idea of that time. And then, so for the first time, we see a real understanding of economics. The concept of economics didn't exist in the Dark Age, but now Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations comes about during this transition. So also new developments in farming, agriculture, make larger populations possible, as better quality of life and lifespan. So now comes the French Enlightenment, brought about by Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau, and John Locke, that really made the U.S. Constitution and the French Revolution possible. You have liberty, fraternity, equality, and other key words of freedom of the higher ages are accountable government, free press, right to vote, equality under the law. These are things that were not possible before. They just didn't really happen. And the end of slavery. So this is really important. It had to await the coming of mechanical industrial revolutions. So 1833, slavery had been abolished in all French and English colonies. And slavery had been around for a couple of thousand years, or possibly even earlier. But so during the Dark Age, that was kind of the rule, because they needed cheap labor, and people had complete rule of life and death over their slaves. But 1833, it starts French English colonies abolished. Then Emperor Alexander II freed 23 million serfs in Russia in 1861. 2 years later, President Lincoln banished slavery from the New World. And China abolished slavery in 1910, like already a decade into Dwapara proper, but so China was a little bit slower there. But China didn't use slaves quite as badly as like the Romans did. I don't know how that was later on, but anyway, so you see, everybody abolished slavery around the same time in this transition period. Isn't that interesting, right? And Aristotle had said if the shuttle would weave of itself, there would be no need of slaves. So that makes sense. That's kind of what happened. The shuttle does weave of itself now, and we have all this automation, harvesting machinery, and all that. So slavery no longer makes sense when we combine that with the key points of the Enlightenment. Then the conquest of space, again, Vedic principle, and not just referring to going to the moon and the planets, but conquering distance in terms of bringing distant things close by to us, like the telegraph, first the telegraph to communicate at a distance, then the telephone, which is just a sound, a hearing, but then you go more difficult to get with television, just much, to see things from far away. And that required the understanding of quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics was a whole nother level of understanding that's just not possible in the Dark Age. And I think it was Werner Heisenberg had once said he had looked at, in America we had the age of a way of thinking of whatever works is what utilitarianism, this kind of concept, if completely focusing on the utility of things rather than on a deeper way of thinking. And Heisenberg had said quantum mechanics would not have been possible in the United States for them to come up with it. It had to be, it's a much deeper concept that had to come out of Europe. That was his feeling. And and I can't think of the guy's name in the U.S. It's kind of like utilitarian kind of principles, and that sort of concept of practicality doesn't allow for these deeper concepts, And we kind of have a make-do attitude here, but a lot of the philosophical concepts that were developed in Europe went much deeper, and that kind of made this quantum mechanics possible, and the things that led up to it. And then also you have 19th century, you have the first establishment of international mail with countries collaborating. That's a big step to have this global type of approach to life. This is the next step in what we're doing in this age. And so international mail, International Red Cross, world courts, world sports, And so now that we're getting into this, the Kali Yuga concepts that we talked about before are now becoming inconsistent with what we believe. And so the Marxism, atheistic materialism are going to gradually disappear. In another 100, 200 years, I don't think atheism will have much power, so to say, because even now we're discovering like people having near-death experiences and how all these experiences all say the same thing, and then people like Journey of Souls, Michael Newton, examining people like hypnotherapy, going back to where people die in a previous lifetime and go up to the other side, and all those experiences that people relate, it's all the same, whether they're atheists, whether they're Catholics, whether they're Islam, or it doesn't matter. They all talk about the same thing happening. So gradually we're getting the proofs that we need, that so after a while everybody will pretty much know, oh, okay, these things are real. We just had that one movie of that doctor that had that near-death experience. That was, that book came out in the movie, and just phenomenal. That this guy was an agnostic, and after that experience, he could no longer be an agnostic. And so, as I said, like the fundamentalistic concepts no longer satisfy us. So, and those kind of the people who are like the fundamentalist thing, they feel a little bit more threatened, by all this new freedom. But gradually, this is going to be the norm, and religion, as I said, always imitates the normal state of the next yuga. In this case, that's a silver age. So this rajasic energy of our ascending bronze age, stirring up the mud of the remaining iron age concepts. So that's what we're dealing with now, and so we have all these like disagreements and wars with pockets of groups that really feel that they want to stay in the dark age. And quantum physics is forcing even the medical community to re-examine their approach, which is still based on atheistic materialism. But now we have holistic medicine, energy medicine, that will gradually take over. And interesting thing, it's called triumphalism approach of religions is disappearing with the end of the Iron Age. The idea of that only my religion is the true religion or whatever. It's like the first World Parliament of Religion in 1893. That's when Swami Vivekananda came to that and made quite a stir. And then in 1920, when Paramahansa Yogananda came to the West for the Parliament of World Religions in Boston, and that made quite an impression. And the world wasn't ready for this sort of thing before. So the first Parliament of World Religions, 1893, that was like at the end of the transition into the Bronze Age. So the rights of animals is becoming important, that all those things are changing. People are drinking coffees and other stimulants to keep up the energy in this new age because it's just too much, they're trying to keep up. Many can't handle the energy and are destroyed by it. But this energy is still mixed with Kali Yuga darkness. So we live in this turmoil. So meditation is becoming necessary for survival, really. And doctors are now recommending meditation, right? Because it's the best way to relieve stress. So torture, cruelty no longer tolerated. No more spanking in schools. That was the norm. Even when I was little, growing up in Berlin as a kid, I remember when they would smack you, and so that they don't allow that anymore. But what I thought was really amazing is Super Nanny. There are a couple of shows like that. And did any of you see that? Amazing, because they show that like spanking, other abusive outbursts by parents don't really work, but the peaceful methods are much more effective and leave no emotional scars. The idea is not to teach a child that violence doesn't solve problems, and the idea is that, like Super Nanny, they showed that the idea is like they would go into a family where they having problems and they wanted help, and so a Super Nanny would come and she'd go in, wonderful, like British nanny that would understand children and things. She would go in and she would teach the family, look, the child is just wanting attention. If you just make it a point to give it wholehearted attention at certain times of the day, and then if they misbehave, then you don't punish them with violence. You punish them by, no TV or no this or that tonight, and not until you change. Or, it's like do something that fits the crime or whatever. And amazing, because those kids within a few days, they were changed just by what she did, and she would teach the parents what to do, and then they got past it. So this is a whole new way of dealing with things, And we have, in this age, we still deal with conflict to learn things, but in the next age, this kind of conflict won't be necessary anymore. We don't need that to learn the way we do now. So the other thing that separates us from the Iron Age, if you look at it, like think about the castles, the fortifications, that you don't see that nowadays because the kind of weapons we have, fortifications don't make any sense. The walls don't keep out missiles and things like that. And also, and then if you go back, remember I talked about the higher age, like 1500 BC and things, on Crete, Knossos, and those civilizations, they didn't even have fortifications. And the thing is, if you study like the ancient texts, like in India, they talk about the type of weapons that were like multiple warhead missiles that would, launch and destroy cities, and people would talk about suffering from burns that were near the cities that were bombed and things. That's in all the ancient, like Mahabharata, the Yoga Vasishta, and Ramayana, and all these old texts that just happen. They mention these kind of things all the time, and flying machines, and we begin to realize, if we know that these people aren't just making this up, fairy tales, that these things are, now that we understand this better with the Yugas, we realize that they're actually talking about real things. And so also swords are no longer used as they were in the Iron Age, because we have better weapons, so nobody uses swords anymore. And the same if you go back in the higher ages, even though we had mentioned The Fall by Steve Taylor, where he had studied all these different scholars about violence and war, that prior to 3100 BC, in the higher age of the Silver Age, there was no more violence, evidently. And the thing is, there would be some violence that we can see in these ancient texts, but they were of a different order, and they were, and I'm going to get into that on our last lecture, the kind of weapons that were used, those were mental weapons, and it's a different way of thinking. So the Sankhya Yoga techniques of spiritual inner development are the normal way of life in the Silver Age. So that's what we're going to imitate or try to be like. So that's the way we advance spiritually in this age. So the definition of yoga, according to Patanjali, the yoga or union with spirit comes about through the cessation of the churning of the mind. So that's this techniques of mind, of meditation that we're starting to learn now. And now I mentioned about existentialism, that we've moved beyond the bottom chakra of the tribe mentality and are starting to take responsibility for our own actions. We don't depend on clergy to talk to God for us. We want to do it ourselves. We don't want the doctor to tell us what to do. We take responsibility for our own health. With existentialism and phenomenology, we started over to take nothing for granted. These are the early signs of the new age, but the cosmic connectedness has to come next, and that's now starting to happen. So this recognition and return of higher age knowledge, first of all, global civilization, English as the first universal language. So one of those things is archaeology. There was no archaeology before the 1700s. It didn't exist until we go back to the previous descending Bronze Age. So here we see these parallelisms here. In the descending Bronze Age, there was archaeology, and now we're getting back to archaeology. And so there was kings such as Ashurbanipal, 700, around almost 700 BC, just right when the last Bronze Age ended. Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon, were the last of their kind to excavate and attempt to restore the past. They were scholars as well as kings. During the descending and ascending Iron Age, almost all knowledge was lost of all the great civilizations from before. So all this, like Babylon, Sumer, Egypt, Harappan civilization in India, lost, including the knowledge of their languages. I mean, how can such a thing happen? Only now that we're back on the comparatively same level of understanding as the last Bronze Age, we begin to unearth and understand the past. So Napoleon's famous 1798 expedition to Egypt gave us the Rosetta Stone. So that's when Napoleon really got things going with archaeology in 1798. And that was the key to decipherment of the Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Rosetta Stone. So, and now we're actually in the third stage of archaeology, which began in the latter part of the 20th century, differs from the previous two stages in that it uses many advanced scientific techniques. It's a whole different field of study than it was during the Bronze Age transition. The early stage of that was really like grave robbing, And so our hope is that gradually the knowledge of these conferences that are happening now, like CPAC and Megalithomania and all this, archaeologists begin to see ancient unusual artifacts not as exceptions, but as clues that history is not linear, but follows what the ancients thought of as the cycle of the ages. So now we're looking at technology, the use of tools to control our environment. This will gradually change over time, and a good example is the Lensman series by E. Doc Smith. Enjoyed reading that, and this like in the 1940s, 1950s, and I'll talk a little more about it for another reason later, but he describes these advancing galactic civilizations of the future based on the powers of the mind, and so the people there, they hear about this one, the most advanced civilization living on a planet that was nobody could get near it, and they said, well, what kind of technology do they have? And this is, they have no technology at all. They don't need it. They do everything with the power of their minds. And the amazing thing was that anyone that would try to interfere and get to their planet, they would control their mind to think, oh, there's nothing there, go back. And so they didn't even have to interact with the people. There's no such thing as fighting them off or anything. If you can control their mind, they don't even know they're missing it or that there's anything there, right? So that was kind of interesting. But I'll bring Lensman series up a little bit later as well for another reason. And then the acupuncture meridian system, that's really an important one because this ancient technology of energy medicine rather than being mechanical. And what was amazing is that, like, I studied a year of acupuncture and Chinese medicine back in the 90s and got a certificate, just enough to get me into trouble. But the point is that it was interesting. We'd use a voltmeter to go find the meridian point. Whenever you voltmeter, you can move around and you get to where the meridian point is and you hear the beep. There it is. It tells exactly where the meridian point is. And then somebody in France came up with the smart idea to use radioactive isotopes to find the meridians. And what they did is they first did it in France, and then they did the experiment again in the U.S. The doctors in the U.S. did it to prove that acupuncture is a real phenomenon. They've scientifically proven it by first injecting radioactive isotope at random into the foot, and then they watched how under the machine, they could watch the radioactive isotope go through all the capillaries, and dissipate, and then they injected the radioactive isotope into a meridian point, and they were just amazed because as soon as they injected it into the meridian point, they watched the isotope go up the entire meridian and follow the entire meridian, that particular meridian in the whole body, and proving that these are real points and that the meridians exist, so it's actually scientifically proven. So it wasn't until our higher age that we're actually able to, prove again what had been discovered thousands of years ago in this meridian system that China and also India, they also had acupuncture in India. It's not as well known, but they do have it there. And I said China and India are the only ones that made it all the way through the dark ages from the higher ages. And this meridian system is still, accurate. And then I know one of these Western doctors went over there, and Bill Moyer also went and went to look at the Chinese system where the person would go into surgery, and they went and all they did was in the surgery they gave the person they put the acupuncture needles in the proper points, and then the person just had the surgery done, felt no pain. Then afterwards he went right back to work because there was no trauma, like usual surgery, and just really quite remarkable. So, these are very advanced systems, very deep, and so then another one is the deeper aspect of martial arts. Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, actually discovers a new inner martial art in 1925, another sign of Dvapara Yuga, of this higher age, new ways of expressing using the life force, which was not known in the Iron Age, especially since martial arts is not violent aggression, but a defensive way of harmonizing with the universe and neutralizing the attacker at the same time. So he's another example of those people with the growing cosmic sense that I mentioned earlier, that Buch's book on cosmic consciousness. And so here's the actual experience in his own words, which revealed to Ueshiba the whole science of Aikido. He had this cosmic experience, and that gave him Aikido, because he was a Japanese warrior who was a swordsman, who was versed in jiu-jitsu and all that. But here he has this experience that gave him the whole understanding of Aikido. And in the spring of 1925, if I remember correctly, when I was taking a walk in the garden by myself, I felt the universe suddenly quaked, and that a golden spirit sprang up from the ground, veiled my body, and changed my body into a golden one. At the same time, my mind and body became light. I was able to understand the whispering of the birds, and was clearly aware of the mind of God, the creator of this universe. At that moment I was enlightened. The source of Buddha is God's love, the spirit of loving protection for all beings. Endless tears of joy streamed down my cheeks. That's the founder of Aikido, pretty amazing. And even in his 90s, I have a movie of him where all these people are trying to attack him on top of a roof on a building, and they're all trying to attack him at once, and nobody could understand why they couldn't get him. But when they replay the movie, you see it's like this old man in his 80s walking around, and all these people are running all over, and this old man just walking around. It's just remarkable. So, and I also want to mention. Anybody heard of abiotic or abiogenic oil? It's kind of, I came across like The Emperor's Tomb by Steve Berry. Steve Berry is a really good writer who writes these action novels that are always have to do with things that are generally not known, that most people have never heard of, but he weaves it into his novels, and you always learn something amazing in science or whatever from his books. And he mentioned this, so I checked more into it, and I also talked with my friend, the one who predated the Sphinx, and he agreed with me because he's a professor of geophysics, geology, and he also agreed with me that this sounds correct. But anyway, and it's Thomas Gold, a respected astronomer and professor at Cornell University, held for years that oil is actually a renewable primordial syrup continually manufactured by the earth under ultra-hot conditions and tremendous pressures. the substance migrates toward the surface, it's attacked by bacteria, making it appear to have an organic origin dating back to the dinosaurs. And an example is Eugene Island, where they found out in the United States, Eugene Island ended up rapidly refilling itself. It made a lot of produced a lot of oil, then it went to almost nothing, and then suddenly it went way higher again, producing way more oil than it did originally. And so some continuous source miles below the Earth's surface. Reserves have rocketed to more than 400 million barrels from 60 million. Stranger still, scientists studying the field say the crude coming out of the pipe is of a geological age quite different from the oil that gushed up 10 years ago. Isn't that interesting? And then Steve Berry mentions about diamondoids that are found inside the oil, like little tiny particles of diamond from deep inside the Earth's surface when these things were, the carbon was formed under pressure into the oil. The pressure also produced tiny diamondoids. You know how diamonds were formed inside the Earth. And so that's another proof of, the source of this. And so the oil is not as limited as oil companies lead you to believe, So, and the thing is, when you think about it, they're always talking about we're running out of oil, and there's always more oil coming. And so the ideal of oil coming from fossils is a myth that needs changing, according to petroleum engineer Kucherov, speaking at the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. All kinds of rocks could have oil and gas deposits. And another person, Ukrainian National Academy of Sciences, estimates that 60% of the content of oil is abiotic in origin and not from fossil fuels. It says companies should drill deeper to find it. And now my tie-in with the Yugas. The last dinosaurs, 145 million years ago, if we give them 5 million years to decay, that leaves about 5,800 complete Yuga cycles since then. And that's a lot of chances for us to use up fossil oil during the transition between Kali and Dvapara Yugas. And that's on both sides, ascending and descending. That's the kind of type when we're, before we get to use like free energy in the higher ages, when we come out of the dark age or going into the dark age, that's the kind of place where we can still use oil, as a transition fuel. And so you think of that's probably over 10,000 opportunities in the last since the dinosaurs to use up this oil. And now Joseph Selby from the Yugas, I was talking to him about it, and he remembered that the Earth was undergoing an ice age much of the time during this period until about 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago or so. And so there was smaller population, but still, when all those, like you had 10,000 periods where people were probably using oil because it's easily accessible for energy, you'd think that the oil would be gone, but it's not. So I'm saying kind of as a joke, I'm using the Yugas to prove abiotic oil, which is kind of, funny, but it's interesting, So, and now fusion power replaces fossil fuels or abiotic oil. So here again we have this multiple companies working on fusion in the private sector, which hadn't happened before. It's becoming so feasible that it's now, the private sector is taking over, doing experiments. And Tri-Alpha Fusion Generator, the picture I have there, is one of those private sector companies. But it's once we have fusion power, we won't need oil. We'll have other alternate forms of energy too that's coming along. But like the National Ignition Facility, to give you an idea how we've advanced from the Dark Age, they use 192 laser beams to generate 500 trillion watts of power, 1,000 times more power than the entire U.S. uses at any one time, and shoots it at a cylinder of hydrogen in 20 billionth of a second to raise it to 100 million degrees. And imagine doing that in the Dark Ages. Think of what kind of things we do these days. This will be 20 times more energy than standard fuels. It's really going to be amazing. And we should have fusion, 5 to 20 years, but I mean, things always happen a bit faster than we think. So I think 5 to 10. And I mentioned once, like the terrorist groups in the Near East, when they have, there's no more use of fossil fuel or abiogenic oil, then they won't have funding, and that would kind of end their reign of terror. So now, as we go on, conquest of space is the second of the 4 aspects of creation of Maya that I talked about, and in this age that we're in, we will conquer space, or we'll go to the stars, we'll figure out all these things. And what's interesting, historically, Isaac Newton talked about action at a distance through empty space, because that's all he knew about. There was a time, even into the 1800s, where the idea of a field was very suspect because it couldn't be seen. Everything was materialistic from the Dark Age. So how can we do anything with fields? So, and then when Einstein discovered general relativity, it's not a fixed background, but flexible and dynamic. So the Big Bang is not an explosion in space, but an explosion of space itself. It's not the universe of matter expanding, but the space itself expanding. Space itself is expanding between galaxies. So, I mean, space can actually expand faster than the speed of light, because you're not doing anything to change the speed of light. It's the space itself that's expanding. It has nothing to do with light. So it can actually expand much faster than that. And so our understanding has changed from matter to energy in this age. And after some 80 years of quantum mechanics, we're still starting to overcome the old scientific approach of atheistic materialism. The observer is still considered an inconvenience in quantum mechanics, but the problem is the observer is central, and you can't get around it. And if consciousness is primary for quantum mechanics, then she is also primary, and we need to see beyond hard artificial intelligence. That is, the whole concept of having a robot, a smart AI type of robot that can think, is going to take a little further into our higher age to use the energies and understand brain on a different level. It's not materialistic the way we think it is. Like in the higher ages they will have these kind of things, but it's on a different level. The universe is fine-tuned for life because life creates the universe, right? And the idea is you're not thinking about first you have a Big Bang and all these galaxies eventually form, and then planets, and eventually you have life forming, and then you have man. No, the whole concept is that life itself starts the universe. It's primary, and it's the observer that comes first in quantum mechanics. John Wheeler, the famous scientist, physicist that trained many of the great physicists of our time, says observers are required to bring the universe into existence. In physics today, strictly speaking, there is no matter, but only the quantum field. And biocentrism is a really amazing book, came out recently by Robert Lanza and Bob Berman, two scientists. They're talking about the probabilistic wave function collapses only when the observer is there and reality is born. Consciousness must precede the universe. This is scientists talking. And in the book, I want to quote this. Particles, if they are not being observed, cannot be thought of as having any real existence, either duration or position in space. Until the mind sets the scaffolding of an object in place, until it actually lays down the threads somewhere in the haze of probabilities that represent the object's range of possible values. It cannot be thought of as being either here or there. Thus, quantum waves merely define the potential location of a particle can occupy. A wave probability isn't an event or a phenomenon, is a description of the likelihood of an event or phenomenon occurring. And this is the key. Nothing happens until the event is actually observed. So until there's an observer, you don't have anything. It's just all probabilistic type of quantum waves that are just anywhere and everywhere. But once observation takes place, boom, then reality takes place. And this has been proven over and over and over in countless experiments. And you can read it in there. It takes too long to go through a actually conducted experiment to explain. Some of the stuff is so weird because it's so counterintuitive. That's why they call it quantum weirdness. So we have to look deeper, and the real problem is we're trapped in the mind. We have to get beyond the mind. That's kind of the secret, and we'll get to into that more as we go deeper. And even scientists are becoming aware that the great discoveries are not based on thought but intuition, breakthroughs beyond the mind. So, and what's interesting, how far can we reasonably predict the future? So some Japanese corporations have business plans that look 200 to 300 years ahead. Is this crazy? So one of my favorite stories is Oxford University. They one of their buildings, they had these the main beam that held up one of their university buildings, and this beam was huge, and it took. They realized, well, how are we going to replace this beam? And so they looked around all across the companies across the globe that made large, like wooden beams, and nobody had beams that size. So what are we going to do? We have to replace this beam because it's too old. And so one of the people in charge of this project happened to go over to the guy in charge of the trees and all the facilities of the buildings, and the guy said, I was wondering when you would come and talk to me, because did you know that 200 years ago, when they put that beam in there, they also planted the trees that would be needed to replace that beam, and those trees are now mature, and they're over there, and so they went ahead and cut one of those trees and put the beam in. But they didn't mention whether they were smart enough to do the same thing again and plant a new pair of trees for the next 200 years to replace that beam. So that's thinking ahead. That's really impressive to me, So it makes more sense that some of these corporations, like I forget, some of these big corporations in Japan actually have 200 or 300 year plans, which seems insane to us when technology is changing so quickly right now. And then Jules Verne is one of the most amazing people in terms of accuracy, predicting the 20th century. We know about his book on the voyage to the moon. He had the correct size of the space capsule, launch site in Florida, length of the voyage, number of astronauts, weightlessness in space, and the splashdown in the ocean. But then, most of you don't know about his book, Paris in the 20th Century, in 1863. That was around the time of Lincoln, with in the 1860s, and at that time Jules Verne wrote that book and locked it away, and it was found in 1994 after 130 years by his great grandson or nephew or something, and it talks about glass skyscrapers, air conditioning, TV, elevators, high-speed trains, gas-powered cars, fax machines, internet-like system. How could he see these things ahead like that? And that I actually have the book on as an ebook. You can download it, and now I'll go back to the Lensman series I mentioned earlier about these. He visualizes the people in the future, with powers of the mind and fighting space battles. The amazing thing is he wrote in the 1940s and 50s, and the Lensman series, a book of series of 5 books, and writing in the 1950s, he talks about this character. He's out in intergalactic space, and his spaceship breaks down, and he's trying to fix it, and his hands get all greasy repairing it, like working on a car or something. And then when he's done, he gets out his slipstick to calculate his next jump through hyperspace. Slipstick, slide rule, without realizing that within 10 years, no one would ever use a slide rule again, because computers, and calculators would take that place. So here's this great science fiction writer who wrote like the first space opera, fascinating stuff, but he completely missed the computer revolution. So what are we missing right now? What are we not seeing that's coming, that's major? Like nobody foresaw that cars would take over the world with freeways and all that. There's a lot of things we don't see. I'll talk about nanotechnology, at least one of the things we can see later. But we're getting kind of closer to where we'll end tonight. But next year next week we'll talk about some of the technology that's coming in nanotechnology and 3D printing and all that. But what I wanted to get into is something that's really brand new, and I don't know if you heard of Carolyn Mace. Her books, Energy Anatomy and Advanced Energy Anatomy, are kind of must reading. She gives the class. I don't know if it's as a book, but she has it on CD and on you can stream it. These lectures that she gives, and she talks about. It used to be people thought that once we are able to eat all these healthy things, that cancer and all these problems would be gone. And she said, well, that didn't happen. And she's one of these people in energy medicine. She does this healing and understanding. She can look at a person aura and understand immediately what's wrong with them. And she was actually hired by hospitals to help them to be on call when a person would come into the emergency room and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. They would call her, and she would just over the phone would look at the person and say, okay, it's this, or his kidney failure or whatever. She would see what was wrong, and she was so accurate that they used her and paid her. It's a pretty amazing woman. And then she kind of retired from that and now teaching. And so she says your biography becomes your biology. That is, the way you live your life is how your body is going to break down or thrive. And she says our traumas settle into our bodies, the lowest 3 chakras. We're forced to deal with our conditions because of our illnesses. Instead of just having the doctor work on us to make us well, we realize that we created those imbalances, and we take charge of our health, of our life, to make us well. That's the difference between Kali and Dvapara Yuga. I'm throwing that in there because she's not aware of the Yugas. She's just talking about her things, but this stuff is so accurate with the Yugas. She says, instead of the 100% energy coming below your waist to make healthy cells, we begin to understand that our trauma blockages keep much of our energy from reaching the organs of our bodies. So that our kidneys, for instance, are only receiving 20% of the energy that they need, and no operation is going to fix that, since the problem is with our energy flow that is tied up with past memories, with traumas. We're no longer fully present in the moment since we have invested our energy in past emotions. We realize that we can no longer take an aspirin to cure a problem. We have to look at it from an energy point of view. That's our new age that we're in. And in Kali Yuga is the first chakra, the bottom chakra, which is tribal consciousness, logic, justice, law, and order. She says epidemics are part of this age, the bubonic plague of Kali Yuga, victim consciousness. That's in this tribal consciousness of the bottom chakra, which reflects Kali Yuga. So in 1929, the Great Depression, we're crippled mentally by this event, and the result is epidemic of polio. We even elect a president who's crippled to help us, FDR. Later, we change our perception to the new idea that we are economically on our feet again. So we unplug our first chakra circuits from that crippling consciousness and plug into a different tribal consciousness. Not until that point was Jonas Salk free to find the polio vaccine. Interesting concept. This is how we co-create our reality. Epidemics are a first chakra phenomenon, of tribal consciousness. AIDS is another example for our time, a first chakra tribal victim consciousness. The poor, the gay people who suffer with this and, trying to deal with their something that's not accepted by society. And so this created this kind of disease, So this we're beginning to understand more things in terms of energy, how the our what do you call the system that ties in all our organs with our consciousness. I can't think of it now, I'm getting tired. But anyway, so she says more, you expect society to take care of you. That's why communism and socialism belong to the first chakra, right? This tribal kind of approach. Right now with the New Age, companies are no longer taking care of their own. The tribal consciousness is changing. You need to handle things yourself. I create my own reality, but I'm still blaming others for not getting a pension. This is the split inside us. We need to clear out the blame and take full responsibility. If you are plugged into the beliefs of society, then you can only heal at the rate of society. It also determines at which rate guidance comes to you. If you want to go faster than society to heal cancer, you have to go within. Mystics are not plugged into tribal systems, so they can manifest truth immediately, what we think of as miracles, people getting healed, overnight. The second chakra, investing our emotions in sex, money, and power. That's the control over others. Also expecting a pension that doesn't materialize. Any sense of betrayal will affect the prostate, such as prostate cancer. Israeli army lived by the rule of Israelis never to sit there and allow evil things to happen after the Holocaust. Then in Desert Storm they had to stand down and end since we just left and didn't conquer Iraq. Resulted in large increase in prostate cancer in Israel. That's something that she noticed. And so anyway, this is this whole change of becoming aware of energy medicine, of dealing with the energy inside of us in terms of healing. We've entered a new age, and in fact, alternative medicine is being used by so many people now. It's like it's just, I don't know, maybe it's 60% people have started using. I forget what the numbers are, but I was quite surprised how big it's gotten. So. We're taking charge of our own life, and that's really the Dwapara Yuga that we're in. So that's the end of this part, and so this next part we're going to talk more about this ascending Bronze Age, and start into the higher ages. So we'll cover that. We'll probably make it to the Golden Age, and then we'll go backwards, back down the last Golden Age and Silver Age. So anyway, thank you all.